Let's start creating some more composite images. Remember on the last composite, we did one of some icebergs sitting there that had washed up on shore, and we had 3 versions of the image. They just varied in brightness, and we ended up stacking them and then just deleting away parts of each layer to reveal what was underneath. Now we're going to do something very similar to that, but we're going to start using a layer mask instead of the eraser tool. And all that's going to do is a layer mask will temporarily hide something, but I can always bring it back at any time. And so it's a way of doing the equivalent to deleting something, but make it not permanent. So here is a sequence of images that I shot when I was in Africa. And I'm going to try to choose at least 2 of these, but possibly more, because I want to get a shot where I like the right and the left side of the photo at the same time. And so in this case, I'm concentrating possibly on the left side of the photo first, waiting until I get something I like, but he's really not interested in me or whatever, so he's just going, okay, whatever. And then maybe I concentrate on what's on the other side, and hopefully I get something there, because the other guy just wasn't moving. And then I noticed the guy on the left looks good, so I shoot him. Now there I like his pose, so I'm going to use that shot. Or, yeah, not that one. I like that shot, right? So that's one of the shots I'm going to use. I'm going to mark that. Well, I already did. You see a red label on it? If you want to put a red label, you just go up to the label menu. Before we had used ratings, but you also have labels. And down here you have those labels, and it really bothers me because one thing about this is the labels show up over here in color, but over here it doesn't show you what color, which I think is absolutely stupid. This should be red. This second one should be yellow. The third one should be green. But why don't they tell you that in this menu? Isn't that just dumb design? I wish they'd show you. You can change the names of these, by the way, in your preferences. If you look in your preferences, you will find a section where you're able to change the names of these. So if you have particular uses, like maybe you want to flag every image that needs retouching, because you don't do retouching, someone else in your organization does. So you create a flag, a label for them called retouch. Then maybe you have something else where it needs some other function that you don't do as well. This one maybe needs a print made to be put somewhere. So you assign one of these others to mark images that need prints made, that kind of thing. So you can customize these in your preferences, but they do show up as various colors. I just wish they would really tell me the colors within the menu, because otherwise you randomly choose and see what color shows up. So anyway, I flagged that one. I'll hit spacebar again so I'm viewing it. That's my left side. So now I don't have to worry about the left side because I know I'm getting out of that picture. And now let's look at the right side and see if we can get one we like. Now that one looks really cool on the right side because this guy's hanging down, all this stuff, they seem to be somewhat engaged. So that's a possibility. That one's kind of fun too. That one, let's see, I just got to pick one. I don't like that one. I don't like that one where they're combined. They kind of visually merge together there, so I don't like them. And so I'm just trying to pick out one that I like. I can always load them all into a Photoshop file, but it's going to start looking complicated because we have a lot of layers I might not need. So I'm just going to go over here and pick one of those. That, no, I don't like the little guy looking down. That, I don't like they're merging together visually. They're merging either that or maybe that. So I'm going to mark that. Well, that one I happen to have marked previously. Do you see it in red? So I'll do that. I'll select those 2 images. Now remember when selecting things in Bridge, if you hold the Shift key when you click on another picture, you get all the ones in between. If you don't want all the ones in between, you need to instead hold the Command key, which is Control in Windows. That grabs individual ones instead of everything in between. I'll choose Tools, Photoshop, load files into Photoshop layers. Of course, it thinks it's busy for some reason. I don't know why my version of Photoshop always thinks that, but. And now if I hide the top layer to reveal the layer that's underneath, can you tell that the camera has panned over between the 2? So that's kind of like a panorama. I might select both of those layers. And if I want Photoshop to deal with how to line those up, do you remember there was the choice called Auto Align Layers? And I could use Auto or Collage or Reposition. Those 3 are usually the ones I start with. But Auto, I'll try and see what we get. Now we have them moved over like that so they would actually line up. Now what I need to do is take that top photo and I want to hide parts of it to reveal what's underneath. What's underneath is the version I like down there. But I could just grab the eraser tool and I could just erase away like this to reveal what's underneath. And I could do that. The problem is, it's not easy for me to bring anything back, especially if I want to do it next month after I've closed the picture. So I'll choose Undo. Here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to go to the bottom of my Layers panel. And down there, I'm going to click on this icon. Looks like a circle inside of a rectangle. And that's a Layer Mask icon. Now when I click on it, watch in my Layers panel what happens to the top layer. Something's going to be added to it. What just got added to that top layer is a layer mask. So if you ever see a white rectangle attached to a layer, it's probably a layer mask. Now, when I paint, I can get paint to go either on my picture, where it looks like paint sitting in my image, or into the layer mask. And the way Photoshop decides where my paint is going to go when I grab my paintbrush is whatever has its corners bracketed or marked. You notice here you can see the corners have these little brackets around them. And I can click back and forth between these two areas and it changes which one has the corners bracketed like that. And that's determining where the paint goes. So if it's over here and I paint, I'll see paint show up within my picture. If instead I have it here, the paint goes into the mask. And so I need to make sure the mask is active like that. Now in a mask, if the mask is white, it allows the layer to show up as it usually would. So white in a mask means show up. The opposite of that would be to introduce some black into that mask. So right now I have the paintbrush tool active and my foreground color is set to black. Before I paint, I just glance up here to double check that the corners of the mask are marked like that to indicate it's active, because that's where my paint's going to go. Now, anywhere where you put black in that mask, it's going to hide the layer it's attached to. So, here it goes. I'm painting with black. When I let go of the mouse button, it will update the mask in my Layers panel. It's just not updating it interactively because it would slow Photoshop down. But I'm going to release the mouse button now, watch my Layers panel, and you'll see the black paint went. So in a mask, black leaves the layer alone. I'm sorry, white leaves the layer alone, and black hides things. Some people like to say white reveals, black conceals. I personally don't think that way. I just don't like rhymey things that do that to me. But some people like that, so I just brought it up. Right? I just think of black hides stuff. Black it out, whatever. But that does the same thing as erasing things, except for it's not permanent. If you look, the part that's hidden is still sitting here in my Layers panel. I can still see it. If I hide the layer that's underneath, you'll see that we've taken that layer and hidden part of it. And as long as the corners of the layer mask are still highlighted, I can continue to paint on it right now, hide more if I want to. But what's really nice is I can switch the color I'm painting with and paint with white. And if I do, now when I paint, I bring things back. That's how layer masks work. Switch back, paint with black, and I can hide it again. And I just happen to have a layer underneath to fill in where you see the checkerboard, which ended up looking like that. Now I can see where I've painted because there's a brightness difference between the two photos. I don't know if you can see it or not, but right here I can see a difference. There might have also been a focus point difference, or my aperture setting might have been different because to me this background looks more out of focus than this part right here. So I might want to be careful in here and switch what I'm painting with, bring back more of the image, but I can't because the guys are underneath that get in there. That kind of thing. I can try to select these two layers now, and let's see what happens if I use Auto Blend and see if it can make it seamless. It tried. Over here I can see a little bit of a line, but it did adjust these and everything, and it modified my masks to say let's make more or less of those layers show up. Oftentimes, I'll just choose undo. What can be better is when you're painting on a mask and you have an image like this one, you might want to use a really soft edge brush. Get the hardness setting of your brush as low as it goes. You can either do that by going up to the brush preview in your upper left and just bringing hardness all the way down, or you can do it using keyboard shortcuts. But doing so, got to paint with black though, it's going to make the transition there so much more gradual that it's not going to be so noticeable. And then just be careful with where it ends so it feels like a natural spot for it to end. So in this case, since the focus was a bit different, I tried to end it where this bush-like thing was in the back. So you see all of the bush, you don't see the bush transitioning to more out of focus. Instead, the more out of focus happens right where the bush ends. All right, now the main thing I need to do to this image is to crop it. So I'll grab the crop tool, and with the crop tool, I'm going to pull this in like so. Get rid of the areas that look like a checkerboard and just kind of recompose. Now there's something I should mention about using the crop tool, and that is there will be an option at the top of your screen which will look like one of two things. It'll either be an icon that looks like this, or it'll be a checkbox that has text next to it. It depends on how big of a screen you're using. If you use a little bitty screen, and when we hook up to a projector like this, it's the equivalent to using a really small screen, it will be an icon to save space. If you use a big monitor, it'll usually have text next to it so that you don't have to try to interpret what an icon means. Anytime there's an icon, if you can't tell what it means, just hover over it, and this means determines if pixel data outside the crop box is retained or deleted. So when that thing's turned on, it means throw away the stuff that is outside of my cropping rectangle. Get rid of it. Whereas if that's turned off, it means just hide what's out there. But if I were to go back to the crop tool a second time, I could extend my cropping and get some of that back. It's up to you. If you think that's stuff you'd ever want to bring back, then you'd want that option turned off. So I'll press Return or Enter, and here we have our composite. So if I turn off the top layer, that's the entirety, and for the most part, of the layer that's underneath. We plop that back on top and used a mask to do it. Masks are not permanent. So let's look at a couple things we can do with the mask that can be kind of cool. You can disable a layer mask temporarily. And all it means is show me everything that's in this layer as if I never deleted anything away. And the way you do that is you hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and you click right on the mask in your Layers panel. So right now I have Shift held down. I'm going to click on the mask. And watch the image when I do that. You see that rest of the layer came right back? And if you look in the Layers panel, you see the big red X through it. That indicates it's disabled right now. It's not active. To make it active again, I hold down the Shift key again, and I click on the mask in my Layers panel, and it turns it back on. So to disable a mask, you hold down the Shift key and click on it. There's a bunch of other things you can do with that mask. I'll show you one other. On my keyboard, right above the Return or Enter key, is the backslash key, the one that leans towards the left, not the one that leans towards the right. The backslash key, if I press it all by itself, when I'm working on a layer that has a mask, watch what happens. It overlays the mask on top of my picture, so I can tell where I've painted and where I haven't. That can be really nice because look at what I just noticed at the bottom. Do you notice where I didn't use a soft edge brush down there? That might be an area I need to inspect because it might be obvious that I didn't use a soft edge brush there, and therefore I might see an obvious transition. But I wouldn't have noticed that because I was in a hurry and I was just going to close this picture and be done with it. Does that make sense? But using the overlay helped me to inspect what I've done to see if there's any areas I might want to check up on. All I did is hit the backslash key all by itself. Not command backslash, just backslash by itself. I'll press it a second time to turn it off, and then I'll look down there and inspect that area. You can paint while that overlay is on, by the way. I can just grab my brush, make sure I have a soft edge. Feel free to paint when it's on, doesn't matter. Maybe I want to fill in this part back here, just in case there was part of the picture back there. I think the picture ended before that part of the image. I can continue to paint all the way out. Okay, I'm going to hit backslash again to turn that off. So you shift click on it to disable it, shift click again to turn it back on, and you do the backslash key, the one that's right above the return or enter, at least on a Mac, the one that leans towards the left, not the one that leans towards the right. There's two slash keys. And then when I'm done, I choose Save As, and I just use a file format that supports layers. Usually for me, TIFF. But Photoshop file format is fine. If you're used to using Photoshop file format, there's technically no reason not to. If you happen to run into a file size limit where it says, hey, this is too big, switch to TIFF. If you run into it even with TIFF, switch to the one called, I think it's large document format. Whatever the choice is, directly below the choice called Photoshop is the really big one. The problem is, when you go to that particular file format, it's not compatible with anything other than Photoshop. So it's limited what you can do with it. Then let's open one that's already been done. And let's just look at it. Because sometimes you're going to open old documents and you might need to rework them because maybe you make a print and you notice a problem in the print. You're like, I can see a weird thing over here. And it might have been where you're painting on a mask and you didn't have a soft enough brush to get it to blend in and you could see the edge. So here's one that's already been done, and let's see if we can find out what's going on with it. I'm going to first hide the top layer. That's going to reveal what's at the bottom. So there's our bottom one. Then I'll turn on the layer above, and you can see what it's doing. Okay. That's what he's doing. We have a mask attached to it over here. I could disable the mask by holding Shift and clicking, and I'm going to see all of what's in that top layer. And then I could press the backslash key to inspect what's there. And look at that hard edge brush that was used. That means it might be very easy. If there's any difference in brightness or any difference in focus or depth of field between those shots, it's probably going to be easy to see where that is. So I might want to come in here with a softer edge brush. And I could paint with white and just kind of get it so that would be less obvious. If I go too far over here, I'll just switch over and paint with black and get that back. I'm just trying to get a soft edge appearance there so that it's going to be less obvious where the transition is. Now, I very frequently switch between painting with black and painting with white. Black hides, white shows. So if you look down where your foreground and background colors are, there's a couple things you might want to know. First off, if your foreground color was not already black, let's say it was a shade of gray, that can be a problem. Because that means we're halfway between black and white. That means have it partially show up. It's not going to fully show up. So first, there's an icon right here, which means reset these to the defaults. And there's a keyboard shortcut for that icon. It's the letter D all by itself. D for default. So sometimes I hit the letter D when I notice my foreground and background colors are not black or white and I need them to be. D does that. Then there's this little double arrow, and that switches the two colors. And the keyboard shortcut for that is the letter X to exchange the two colors. And I use those all the time. So I might be in here, and I'm painting with black to get this into here. And I go, oh, that's too far, because I saw a little piece of the other image show up. So I hit X to say, no, I wanted to paint with the other one to fix it. So D for default, X for exchange are things that I use all the time. And then remember, the backslash key is what gave me that red overlay. I just hit the backslash key a second time, and I can get it back. You can have a layer mask on every layer except for one. If you have a layer that's called background, then the layer called background will have a lock symbol on the right side of it. It means that certain features can't be used with it. For instance, those layer styles like drop, shadow, and stroke, you can't put those on the background. And in most versions of Photoshop, you can't add a layer mask to the background. But you don't have to have a background. If you double click on the name, you could type in something different. The lock symbol would go away, and now it's a normal layer that you can do anything with. You can add layer styles, add layer masks, whatever you'd like. Here's a more complex image. If you look at my layers panel, we got a bunch of stuff in there. There's some stuff in here we haven't talked about yet, but I'm going to turn off the eyeballs. You can just drag down the column where the eyeballs show up to turn off more than one at a time, and I'll just have the bottom one turned on. So here's our bottom or base image. And then I'm just going to turn on the image that's above it. That's some grass, just to cover up one of those guys. That's copied from a different picture or whatever. We'll learn how to do that kind of stuff when we do retouching. On top of that, I got some antlers to go there. There's a mask attached to those antlers. If I hit the backslash key, do you see how it's very precisely put around those antlers? Because if you just randomly put grass on grass, the two blend together and it doesn't look right. And I needed to make it more precise. If I turn this off by holding the shift key and clicking on it, you can see that's the whole picture. And I only used that one little part, just that little thing. Right? And let's just put a couple other things in here. So when that was put in, the next thing that's above it is something I haven't talked about yet, but it's an adjustment layer, and it's adjusting the color of the antler. Can you see the color change when I turn it on and off? It's becoming more colorful, that type of thing. Top of that, we got a replacement for those antlers. I found a better version. We had his head at a different angle. And we have a mask. If I do backslash, there's the mask. And then there's an adjustment layer to adjust its appearance. We'll talk about adjustment layers very soon. Then we come up further. Do you see this dark grass right here? To me, that's a distraction on the edge of my frame. I don't want anything on the edge of my frame distracting me. So copy some grass from somewhere else. Put it in there. Also got rid of those little bright parts because your eye is directed to bright or colorful things. So if there's anything bright in your image, it doesn't have to be there. Think about retouching it out so your eye doesn't look at it. Above that are some adjustments. We haven't talked about adjustment layers in depth yet, but these are adjusting my picture. Do you see in the upper right, that's just tuning some things in. This is darkening the edge. And this is making the bottom of the image more green. But do you see how that's all built up in layers? The layers are looking pretty complicated though. So we got to get used to more features before we can get to this kind of a composite. So oftentimes you'll get your layers panel to start looking kind of complex, but if you learn the individual features one at a time, then it's not so bad. Right now what I notice is a bunch of layer masks. Anytime you see a little rectangle to the right of a layer, it's a layer mask. And know that layer masks limit where something shows up. Wherever there's black in the mask, whatever it's attached to isn't showing up. You can hit backslash to see what part of the picture that is. That type of stuff. All right, before I move on though, and we start learning about things like adjustment layers, we had a question. Do you still have one?
I noticed you got quite a tight paint on that middle antler when you did it. Is there a snap to image feature in Adobe that lets you get that close?
There are some features that will help you get that close, meaning I didn't necessarily paint that manually by hand. We haven't talked yet about selections. And if I were to make a selection first of those antlers, then when I add a layer mask, the selection that I have gets converted to a layer mask. And so there are some selection tools that can kind of cling to the edges of things and that can really help us out. And so we should end up looking at how selections work and how they relate to masks. And we'll do that.